Chapter 1: The Wrong Floor. The door was already open. That was the first thing that was wrong. Caelum Virel stood in the hallway with a sealed envelope pressed against his chest, rain still dripping from the hem of his jacket, and he knew. He knew before he even took another step that something was off. The floor was wrong. Not wrong like a small mistake. Wrong like a held breath. Wrong like standing at the edge of something and not knowing how far the fall goes. The carpet was thick under his feet. Not the flat, worn-down industrial kind that legal firms kept in their lobbies. The kind that swallowed sound whole. The kind that cost more per square foot than Caelum made in a month. He could feel it through the soles of his shoes like a signal his body picked up before his brain caught it. He counted back. He always counted. 3 chimes going up. He'd heard 4. Or was it 3.5? The elevator in this building had a lag on the 3rd floor. He'd memorized that weeks ago. But tonight the rain had been loud against the glass panels in the lobby. Tonight his focus had slipped. Just once. And now he was standing somewhere he had no business being. Caelum didn't move for a long moment. He tilted his head slightly, the way he always did when he needed the room to talk to him. And the room did. Rooms always did if you listened right. No keyboard clicks. No printer hum. No low-level office noise, the kind that filled every floor of every corporate building he'd ever walked through after midnight. This floor was quiet in a way that felt intentional. Quiet like it had been designed to keep people out. Or to keep things in. He should have turned around right then. He almost did. Then he heard the voices. 3 of them. Coming from somewhere to his left. Through a door that sat partially open, warm amber light cutting a thin stripe across the marble floor of the hallway. Low voices. Even voices. The kind that didn't rise, didn't crack, didn't rush. The kind that had never had to. Caelum exhaled slowly. Legal department, he told himself. Had to be. This was still Hartwell Tower. He just got the floor wrong. People worked late in legal. He'd find the right suite, drop the envelope, get back to the elevator, count more carefully this time. He moved toward the open door. Knocked twice. The voices stopped. Hi viewers. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like the air itself was telling you to leave? Drop a comment and tell me what you did. The silence on the other side of that door lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds doesn't sound like a long time until you're standing alone in a hallway that costs more per square foot than your rent, holding someone else's legal documents, realizing you have absolutely no idea what floor you're on. Then a voice said, "Come in." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Caelum pushed the door open. The room hit him before he'd taken a full step inside. Not visually. Caelum hadn't seen anything in 11 years. What hit him was everything else. The weight of the space, high ceilings, he could tell from the way sound moved. The way his own quiet breath bounced back at a slightly different angle than it would in a standard office. The smell. Expensive leather, paper that wasn't cheap copy stock. Something cedar-adjacent and clean that had nothing to do with air freshener. And the pressure. That was the only word for it. Pressure. The kind that built behind your ears when you walked too close to something powerful. Like standing next to a running engine. Like the moment before lightning touched ground. 3 sources of it. 3 men. He didn't need to see them. Their presence in the room had texture. Density. The way their energy took up space told him more than a photograph would have. They were sitting, 2 of them, based on the direction of their voices. 1 was standing. All 3 had gone completely still the moment he walked in. Caelum stopped in the center of the doorway. He held up the envelope slightly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I'm looking for compliance suite B. I have a delivery for..." "Wrong floor." The voice came from the right. The standing one. Flat. Not unkind. Just precise. Like it said exactly as much as it meant to say and not 1 syllable more. Caelum nodded once. "I figured. I apologize." He started to turn. That's when he heard it. A sound so small he almost missed it. A thin, high, broken sound from somewhere near the floor. Not a word. Not a voice. Just a breath and a whimper wound together. Coming from the hallway just behind him. He stopped turning. crouched instead. His hand found it before his mind had fully caught up with what he was doing. Warm, trembling, small enough to cup in both palms. Formatted in one spot, wet, he realized. Not rain wet, something else. Injured. The puppy let out another sound, barely there, and pressed its nose against Caelum's wrist. The room behind him had gone absolutely silent. He didn't ask for permission, didn't think about whose floor this was or whose office or how badly he'd already overstepped just by walking through the door. He just unwound the scarf from his neck, the worn gray one that had seen better days, and wrapped it loosely around the animal. He ran his fingers along its paw, slow and careful, until he found the spot that made it flinch. Front left. Something was wrong with the joint. Not broken, he didn't think, but something. He kept his voice low, barely above a murmur. Easy, easy. I've got you. You're okay. Nobody in the room spoke. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress three strangers in an office he'd stumbled into by accident. He'd just heard an animal in pain and his hands had already moved. That was all. When he finally looked up, turned his face toward the room, the way he'd learned to do so, people didn't feel unseen even when he couldn't see them. The pressure in the space had shifted. Not gone, but different. Rearranged. One of the seated figures moved slightly. A small adjustment, like leaning forward a fraction. Another had gone very still in a way that felt different from the stillness before. That earlier stillness had been the stillness of people interrupted. This was the stillness of people watching something they hadn't expected. The youngest-sounding voice, the one on the left, the one that had a slightly different register than the others, less controlled, not quite as flat, said quietly. He didn't hesitate. Nobody responded to that. The oldest voice, the one from the right, the standing one, the one that had said wrong floor like a statement of fact, said nothing for a long moment. Then, stay. Caelum's hands stilled on the puppy. He stayed crouched, didn't stand up, just turned his face toward the source of the word. Stay, he repeated back, not sarcastic, genuinely asking. For what? A beat, 2 beats, because someone just tried to kill that dog. Caelum didn't move. The puppy shifted in the folds of his scarf and let out a small sound that was almost a sigh. And then he heard it, the sound he hadn't registered consciously until right now. A soft mechanical click, coming from the door behind him. The lock, automated, engaged. He was still crouched on the floor of an office he'd walked into by accident, holding an injured animal that apparently someone had tried to hurt, surrounded by 3 alphas whose combined presence made the air feel like it had weight to it. And the door had just locked. I thought I had made the worst mistake of my life. The narrator lets that sit for exactly a breath. I didn't realize yet. That mistake was the only reason I survived what came next. Caelum's full name was Caelum Virel. He was 26 years old. He worked nights. He delivered sealed envelopes to legal departments and compliance offices and occasionally accounting suites in the kinds of buildings that had different art on every floor and security desks that cost more to maintain than some people's salaries. He got paid per delivery. He took the bus home. He ate the same dinner most nights because it was cheap and it worked, and he didn't see the point in spending money on variety when consistency kept things manageable. He had been blind since he was 15. He didn't talk about that part much. Not because it was shameful, just because people tended to react in one of 2 ways and he was tired of both of them. Either they looked at him like he was a tragedy that hadn't finished happening yet, or they got aggressively, performatively impressed by the fact that he had a job and took the bus and existed in the world like a functioning adult. Like that was extraordinary. Like that was the ceiling. It wasn't the ceiling. It was just Tuesday. Caelum had built his life on what he could control. Sound. Memory. Routine. He knew the exact number of steps from the bus stop to his building's front door. 43 on dry pavement, 41 when he cut the corner on wet nights because the rain made people move differently and the sidewalk cleared faster near the curb. He knew which elevators had a slight mechanical lag before the doors opened, which lobbies had an echo that would tell him how full they were, which security guards would ask unnecessary questions, and which ones would just wave him through. He had learned the city the way other people learned a language. By immersion, by error, by repetition until the patterns became automatic. What he had not learned and never quite managed to prepare for was people. People were unpredictable in ways that no amount of listening ever fully solved. Take that evening before any of this. Before the wrong floor and the locked door and the puppy shaking in the folds of his scarf. Caelum had come through the main lobby of Hartwell Tower at 11:47. The way he always did on Tuesdays, envelope sealed, delivery time logged on the small recorder he kept in his breast pocket. The security desk was manned by someone new. He could tell by the breathing pattern. The usual guard, Terrence, breathed through his nose and tapped his pen against the desk when he was bored. This one breathed through his mouth slightly and had the particular kind of restless energy that came from someone who hadn't settled into a routine yet. New guy. Caelum had presented his courier ID and stated the delivery destination the same way he always did. Professional, efficient, clean. The new guard had taken about 3 full seconds too long to respond. Then, "You sure you're in the right building?" Caelum had kept his face neutral. "Yes. Because this is a restricted access tower after 11. Deliveries need to be escorted. I have a regular access pass. It was issued by building management 6 months ago. The pass number is on the card I just handed you." Another pause. Are you a courier? Flat. Final. Who has a valid pass? That you're holding. The guard had let him through eventually, but it had taken longer than it should have. And Caelum had stood there through the whole thing with his jaw slightly tight and his breathing even, because making a scene would have done nothing except cost him the delivery contract, and the delivery contract paid his rent. Sometimes the hardest part of being underestimated wasn't the anger. The anger was manageable. The anger was clean. The harder part was the quiet accumulation of it. The way 100 small moments stacked up over months and years until they had weight. Until they started to feel less like other people's mistakes and more like a verdict. He didn't let himself go too far down that road. He never did. He picked up the envelope from the security desk where the guard had set it instead of handing it back, walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 41st floor, Compliance Suite B, the standard drop point, and started counting. He always counted the chimes. But the rain had been loud tonight. Really loud. He'd caught 3. Maybe it was 3.5. The elevator in Hartwell had that lag on the 3rd floor, he was sure of that, but he'd also been thinking about the guard's face, or what he imagined the guard's face had looked like, and the thinking had pulled at his attention the way small irritants always did when he let them. 1 chime. 2. 3. He stepped off, and the carpet told him immediately that he was wrong. The wrong floor, the wrong door, the door that was already open, and now he was here. On the floor of an office that smelled like power and old wood, holding a wounded animal that someone had deliberately hurt, with the door locked behind him and 3 men watching him from across the room. One of them spoke. Not the oldest one this time. The middle one. The voice had a different quality, not softer exactly, but more precise. Like every word had been measured before it left his mouth. "What's your name?" Not a question. A request for information. Caelum Virel. Courier for Meridian Legal Services. "And you work this building regularly?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays." A brief silence. "How long?" 6 months. The oldest voice again. Still standing, Caelum could tell. Still over to the right. "You know the layout. The floors I'm cleared for." "Yes." 41st. 39th. 35th. Caelum nodded. They'd done their homework fast. Or maybe they just knew the building's courier access list. That wasn't hard to pull up if you had the right clearance. And based on everything about this room, these men had whatever clearance they wanted. "What did you hear in this building tonight before you came to this floor?" The question came from the oldest one. The standing one. Caelum paused. It was a strange question. Not "what are you doing here" or "who sent you?" Not the security-style questions he was used to. "What did you hear?" He turned it over. "A lot of things," he said carefully. "Specifically." He shifted his position slightly on the floor, settling the puppy more securely. The animal had stopped trembling quite so hard. Still tense, still in some kind of pain, but responding to warmth. Responding to stillness. "Lobby." New guard, nervous, maybe 2 weeks on the job. 2 women on the phone near the elevator bay, talking about a board meeting getting pushed. Someone arguing in the east stairwell around the 39th floor when I came down after my last drop. Silence. A different kind of silence than before. Arguing, the oldest one said. One voice mostly. The other one was quieter. The louder one said something about files. Something about them not reaching the board. Caelum paused again. I wasn't trying to listen. It's just, when voices carry, I catch them. The room was very still. The puppy made a small noise against his scarf. And Caelum had the distinct, uncomfortable feeling that the thing he had just described, the argument, the files, the board, meant something to the 3 men in this room that it hadn't meant to him. Something significant. Something they had been looking for. You said you weren't trying to listen, the youngest voice said. It had an edge to it now. Not hostile exactly, but sharp. Testing. Convenient. Caelum turned his face in that direction. I know what you're thinking, he said. Do you? You're thinking I showed up here at a specific time with a specific animal and a very specific thing to say, and the timing is too clean. He kept his voice level. I understand why that reads suspicious, but I came up the wrong elevator because of bad weather and a distracted count. I knocked because I thought this was a legal office. And I heard the argument because sound carries in that stairwell and I pay attention to what I hear. He paused. That's all. The youngest didn't respond immediately. The puppy, as if on cue, shifted in Caelum's lap, gave a small grunt of effort, and pressed its nose against the back of his hand. Then, slowly, it curled into a tighter position and stopped moving. Like it had decided. Like it had made a choice. The youngest voice went quiet in a way that felt less like silence and more like reassessment. The middle one said, almost to himself, it chose him. Nobody argued with that. Caelum sat on the floor of the most expensive office he'd ever accidentally entered, one hand resting on a sleeping animal. Rain hitting the windows he couldn't see. The envelope for compliance suite be still sealed under his arm. He was exhausted. He'd been on his feet since 8. He still had 2 more drops to make before he could go home. He had absolutely no idea what was happening. But for reasons he couldn't have explained if someone asked him, the room, despite everything, didn't feel dangerous. Heavy. Yes. Strange. Absolutely. But not dangerous. Not to him. Not yet. One of them, he thought the middle one, moved toward a counter somewhere to the left and put something on. Kettle from the sound. The click and hiss of it. Nobody said anything for a while. The oldest voice finally broke it. We'll explain what we can, he said. After that you can decide what you want to do. Caelum nodded slowly. All right. But you're staying on this floor until we know it's safe. The word safe landed strangely. Safe from what exactly Caelum wanted to ask. He didn't. Not yet. Instead he adjusted his position on the floor, let the puppy stay where it was, and waited. Outside, rain hit the glass in sheets. And somewhere in this building, something was already moving. Chapter 2. The crack in the wall. The kettle finished boiling. Nobody moved toward it for almost a full minute. That minute had a texture to it. Like the room was holding something in, the way you hold a breath right before you say something you can't take back. Caelum had learned to read minutes like that. Most people talked to fill silence. These 3 did not. They let it sit. They let it do what it needed to do. That told him something. He wasn't sure what yet. The middle voice, the measured one, the precise one, finally said, Zephyr, get the tea. A shift of weight to the left. Footsteps. Quiet, controlled, the walk of someone who didn't make unnecessary movement. Caelum clocked the gait without meaning to. Even stride, slight lean forward. Purposeful. Zephyr. So that was one name. He filed it. The oldest voice hadn't moved from his position on the right side of the room. Still standing. That itself was information. The other 2 were seated or had been. But the oldest one stood like a man who made decisions about when he sat down and hadn't made that decision yet. The youngest had gone very quiet since the moment the puppy settled on Caelum's lap. Not the hostile quiet from before. Something else. something that felt almost like recalibration. Caelum kept one hand resting lightly on the animal. Its breathing had steadied into something shallow but consistent. Alive. In pain, probably, but alive, and at this point that was what mattered. A mug appeared beside him on the floor. Set down, not handed to him. He appreciated that. People who handed things to him directly always waited for a reaction. Like they needed confirmation that he'd received it correctly. The mug on the floor he could find on his own timeline. He found it, wrapped both hands around it, let the heat run up through his palms. "The dog," the oldest voice said. "Tell me what you noticed about its injury." Caelum considered. "Front left paw. There's a contusion. Something hit it or it was stepped on deliberately. The fur's matted above the joint, not torn, so whatever made contact was flat. Not a kick. Something pressed." He paused. "And it was scared. Not lost scared. Hurt scared. There's a difference." "A beat." "There is," the oldest said. And the way he said it wasn't confirmation. It was something quieter. Like the observation had landed in a place it wasn't expected to reach. Zephyr set a second mug on the desk. Then a third. "Her name is Juniper," the youngest voice said. He was the one on the left, and he said it without preamble, like the name had just worked its way out of him without permission. She belonged to one of our employees. Past tense. Caelum caught it immediately. He kept his face neutral. "He brought her in sometimes," the youngest continued. His voice had a younger quality to it than the other two. Not immature, just less armored. Like he hadn't fully decided how much of himself to lock away yet. Demarian. He named her Juniper because she was born in November. Demarian. "He's been missing," the middle one said. 48 hours. The oldest one, who still had not sat down, said, "The dog was found in the east stairwell earlier tonight, injured, by one of the building maintenance staff who didn't know what to do with her. He left her in the hallway outside our office." Caelum turned this over. East stairwell. Same one where he'd heard the argument. "The man arguing in the stairwell," Caelum said slowly. "Around the 39th floor. When exactly?" 11:20. Maybe 11:22. "You said he was talking about files, that they couldn't reach the board." The oldest's voice had shifted slightly. Not louder, just more directed, like a lens-narrowing focus. "Can you remember anything else from that conversation?" Caelum closed his eyes. A habit, not a need, and went back. The stairwell. He'd been on his way down from the 39th floor drop, moving carefully on the stairs because rain always made the metal-edged steps feel different under his cane, and the voices had come up from below. One louder, one quieter. The louder voice said, "If those files make it to the board, we're finished." And then something I couldn't catch. And then, "The access logs show someone's been pulling the records." And then the quieter voice said something I only caught part of. Sounded like, "By Friday." Silence. He opened his eyes, turned his face toward the center of the room. The louder voice. "Can you describe it?" The middle one. Precise. Focused. Caelum thought. Older. Not young. Probably 50, 60. Slight accent, not strong, something that comes and goes. And he was trying to keep it down, but he was angry enough that it kept slipping through. The kind of angry that's been sitting for a while. The oldest voice made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "Harrington," the youngest said, under his breath. Not to Caelum. The room adjusted around that name like furniture being moved. Caelum didn't know who Harrington was, but the name changed the pressure in the space in a way that told him it was significant. Not just significant, targeted. Like a piece had just snapped into a place they'd been trying to reach. The middle one, Zephyr, said carefully, "What you overheard in that stairwell. You understand this can't leave this floor." "I understand. And you understand that the man who owned this dog went missing shortly after he filed a formal complaint about financial discrepancies in this company's capital accounts." Caelum was quiet for a moment. "Is that what you're investigating?" "Among other things." "And the man arguing about files in the stairwell. is connected to the reason Demarian is missing. The oldest voice, flat, certain, the puppy Juniper, shifted in Caelum's lap and made a small sound. Not distress, just adjustment, like she was getting comfortable for something long. Caelum sat with this. He was a night courier who had miscounted elevator chimes in the rain. He delivered sealed envelopes to compliance offices. He ate the same dinner most nights and counted bus chimes and memorized hallway acoustics. His life was small and controlled and completely separate from whatever was happening in this room. Or it had been until approximately 40 minutes ago. You said Demarian is missing, Caelum said. Present tense. The oldest didn't respond immediately. That pause was its own answer. What aren't you saying? Caelum said. Another pause. Longer. We're waiting on confirmation, the youngest said. His voice had gone flat in a way that didn't quite work. Like he was trying on the older one's tone, and it didn't fit him yet. Caelum nodded once. He didn't push. He'd learned a long time ago that some silences weren't pauses. They were walls. And pushing against a wall didn't open it. It just told you how solid it was. So he waited. He listened to the rain. He listened to the buildings settling around them. The low mechanical breath of the HVAC system, the faint shift of wind pressure against the high windows, the distant sound of an elevator somewhere below. He listened to the three men in the room with him. The youngest was anxious. Not obviously, but his breathing was slightly faster than the other two, and he'd adjusted his position 3 times in the last 10 minutes. When anxious people stayed still, they moved in smaller ways. Fingers, shoulders, weight distribution. The middle one, Zephyr, was controlled. Extremely controlled. The kind of controlled that came from practice, from deciding once a long time ago to become someone who didn't show things, and sticking to that decision every single day since. His breathing was the most even of the 3. His body made the least unnecessary sound. The oldest one, the one still standing, was something Caelum didn't have a clean word for yet. Not anxious. Not performing control. Just present in the way that certain people were present. Taking up space without effort. Thinking in a way that had texture to it, like you could feel it happening even if you couldn't hear it. All 3 of them were alphas. Caelum knew that. He'd known it from the moment he walked through the door. The particular kind of pressure that alphas carried was its own frequency. He'd grown up learning to navigate it, to move around it, to stay out of its way. Alpha pheromones were the kind of thing that most omegas felt first in their chest. A tightening, a heightened awareness, the ancient biological signal that said pay attention, adjust accordingly. Caelum didn't adjust. That wasn't stubbornness exactly. It was something he'd worked out years ago, in the quiet of his apartment, the nights he lay awake and built himself back up from the pieces. He didn't adjust to power the way he was supposed to. He acknowledged it. He noted it. He filed it accurately, and then he kept being himself. It was the only thing that had ever worked. You said he's been missing 48 hours, Caelum said. When does the investigation officially have to escalate to law enforcement? 72, the middle one said. So you have a day. Less if the board meeting Harrington just scheduled is connected to what we think it's connected to. What do you think it's connected to? A beat. Then the middle one said simply, evidence disposal. Caelum's hand stilled on Juniper's back. Evidence disposal. He turned that over very carefully. He scheduled a board meeting to destroy records, or to create enough confusion in the process that finding specific records later becomes nearly impossible. Zephyr's voice was careful. Each word placed deliberately, like he was building something as he spoke, which achieves the same result without the same risk. And you can't stop the meeting. Not without exposing how much we know, which tells whoever is watching that we're closer than they think. The oldest voice now, still from the right, which puts everyone connected to this investigation at risk. Everyone connected to this investigation. He said it plainly. He said it the way you said something to someone you were including in a category, not warning from the outside. Caelum understood exactly what was happening. He had walked into this office by accident. He had heard a conversation in a stairwell by accident. He had picked up an injured dog by instinct and not by choice. And now he was sitting on the floor of the most locked-down office in this building, 48 hours into a corporate murder case, apparently holding information that mattered. He was already inside this. Had been from the moment he stepped off the elevator on the wrong floor. The access logs, he said. The argument mentioned someone pulling records. Do you know who it was? We have a short list, Zephyr said. And the keycard. Silence. I heard a keycard, Caelum said. In the stairwell before I heard the argument. There's a specific reader on the 39th floor emergency exit. It has a 2-beep pattern. First beep, half-second lag, second beep. Different from the standard readers. He paused. It beeped twice before the voices, which means whoever was in that stairwell used a card registered to that specific access point. The silence that followed this was very different from the ones before. It had a different weight to it. He heard the youngest one exhale through his nose. He heard the oldest one finally move. The sound of him pulling out a chair. Sitting down. First time he'd sat down since Caelum walked in the door. That access point, the youngest said carefully, is restricted to 6 people in this building. Then your shortlist just got shorter, Caelum said. Nobody spoke for a moment. And then, from somewhere unexpected, from the youngest one, the one who had accused him of being a spy 20 minutes ago, came something almost like a sound of surprised recognition. Not a laugh. Just the breath before a laugh. The thing that happened when someone had been braced for one thing and gotten something entirely different instead. Okay, the youngest said quietly, to himself more than anyone. Just okay. Like a word that meant more than it sounded. Zephyr set another mug of tea down somewhere. This one by the desk from the sound of it. He didn't offer commentary. The oldest one spoke. Caelum. First time he'd used his name. Yes. You said blindness forced you to develop extraordinary listening skills. Not a question. A statement of what he'd observed. I said I pay attention to what I hear. Caelum's voice was level. Those aren't the same thing. A pause. Fair, the oldest said, and something in the room shifted again. That same rearranging of furniture, invisible. Like the pressure had taken a slightly different shape. Like 3 men who had been evaluating someone had arrived at a different conclusion than the one they started with. Caelum sat with Juniper in his lap and the mug warm between his palms and the rain against the high windows, and he turned over everything he knew. A missing man named Demarion. A dog named Juniper who had been deliberately hurt and left in a stairwell. An argument at 11:20 that Caelum had overheard without trying. A keycard beep with a half-second lag that narrowed 6 possible suspects to something smaller. A board member named Harrington who was angry and scheduled meetings that weren't what they claimed to be. And 3 men, triplets, he was increasingly certain, from the way their voices occupied the same register even when they diverged in tone, who had been investigating something that had now reached a point where someone was willing to silence a witness. He thought about Demarion. He didn't know the man. He knew his dog's name and the fact that he'd picked it in November and that Juniper liked warmth and responded to a quiet voice. But he thought about him, and that had weight. I want to help, Caelum said. The room went still. He hadn't planned to say it, but he heard it leave his mouth and he didn't walk it back. You don't know what you're stepping into, the youngest said. No, Caelum agreed, but I know what I heard. And I know what that keycard pattern means for your shortlist. And I know that whoever hurt this dog knew exactly whose it was. He paused. That's not random. That's a message. The oldest one was quiet for a long moment. Then, you understand that staying involved means staying close to this investigation. Yes, it means staying close to us. Something in the way he said us had texture. Not a threat. Just a fact. Delivered with a kind of honesty that Caelum hadn't expected from the most powerful voice in the room. I understand, Caelum said. Juniper made a small sound and pressed her nose against his wrist. The rain was still loud outside. The room had that warmth to it, the kind that surprised you when you found it somewhere you hadn't expected. Caelum had been in hundreds of office buildings. He had delivered documents to boardrooms and executive suites and the kind of high-floor offices where the furniture cost more than small cars. None of them had ever felt like this. Warm wasn't the right word exactly. Present. That was it. Like the room knew he was in it. He stayed quiet with that thought and didn't do anything with it. Just let it be what it was. The youngest one's voice, when it came again, had less edge in it. Not soft, but the sharp corners had shifted. Zephyr's going to pull the access log for the 39th floor emergency exit, he said. If your timing is right, we can narrow the window. My timing is right, Caelum said. Not arrogantly, just accurately. The youngest one almost made that sound again. That almost laugh. The middle one, Zephyr, was already moving. Keyboard clicks. Deliberate. Fast. Not frantic, just efficient, the way someone typed when they knew exactly where they were going. The oldest one sat across from where Caelum was still positioned on the floor. Caelum could feel his attention. That was the only word for it, attention, not staring, not pressure, just the specific quality of focus that came from someone who had decided you were worth paying attention to. It was uncomfortable. Not because it was hostile, because Caelum hadn't been looked at like that in a long time. Like he was a person who had walked in. Not a couture piece of the furniture. Not a complication. Not a liability. Not something to be managed or guided or gently redirected. Just a person who had walked in and was worth paying attention to. He adjusted his hold on Juniper and kept his face neutral and didn't do anything with the feeling. Zephyr's typing stopped. I have the access log. A pause. 11:18 to 11:24. 6-minute window on the emergency exit reader. 1 card registered. Another pause. Kofi Harrington. The youngest one made a sound that wasn't quite a word. The oldest one didn't move. Caelum absorbed the name. Same name the youngest had said under his breath earlier. The board member. The one who had scheduled the early meeting. The one whose voice had carried up a stairwell at 11:20 with anger that had been building for a long time. Same man. He was in the stairwell himself, Caelum said. Yes, the oldest. Which means he's not directing from a distance. Caelum turned it over. He's hands-on, which makes him more dangerous, the youngest said, and harder to predict. The oldest one's phone buzzed once on the desk. Nobody moved. It buzzed again. He picked it up, didn't put it on speaker, just answered, said 2 words. Caelum couldn't make them out, and then went completely still. The stillness was different. Every muscle, every breath, like something had just recalibrated the entire room. He ended the call, set the phone down. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Then he said very quietly, Demarian was found. Nobody moved. He's dead. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Caelum felt the ripple of it. The youngest one made no sound at all. Zephyr's fingers were still on the keyboard. The oldest one turned toward Caelum. And the thing on his face, whatever it was, wasn't just grief. It was something colder. Something that had been building for 48 hours and had just found its shape. Which means whoever silenced him knows someone else heard that conversation. His eyes were on Caelum. You! The rain hit the windows. Juniper shifted in the scarf. And Caelum understood. Fully, completely, with the clarity of a sound arriving in a room that had been quiet long enough to hear it, that the wrong floor had led him somewhere that wasn't going to let him go. Not because they were holding him. Because he already knew too much. And somewhere in this building, on a floor below them, someone with a registered keycard and decades-old anger had already decided that witnesses were a problem. Caelum was a witness, and the doors were still locked. Chapter 3. Danger and Trust. The alarm didn't build. It just happened. 1 second the office was quiet. Rain, breathing, the faint hum of the building below them, and the next second every panel on the wall lit red and a sound tore through the space like something had been ripped open. Caelum was on his feet before he'd decided to stand. Juniper scrambled upright in the scarf, disoriented, and let out a sharp bark that bounced off the high ceiling and came back changed. The 3 men moved fast, not panicked, coordinated. The kind of movement that came from people who had thought about this moment before it arrived, who had run the scenario in their heads and already knew their positions. Caelum heard the oldest one cross to the far wall. Heard Zephyr move to the desk. Heard the youngest go toward the secondary door on the left side of the room. Not the main entrance, a second one, narrower, built into the wall in a way that would be invisible if you didn't know it was there. Caelum knew it was there now. He filed that. "Stay center," the oldest said. Not loud. Directed. Caelum stayed center. He held Juniper against his chest and turned his head slowly, letting the room talk to him through the noise of the alarm. The alarm itself layered. 2 tones. The lower one was continuous. The upper one pulsed every 3 seconds. Not a fire alarm. Something more specific. A breach notification. Internal security. Someone had triggered a sensor. Caelum turned that over while the red light moved across surfaces he couldn't see but could feel. The warmth of it shifted the air differently near the windows. The youngest was at the secondary door. His breathing was different now, controlled but elevated, the way breathing gets when adrenaline hits and you manage it instead of letting it manage you. He said quietly, "East corridor sensor. 47th floor." "Same floor," Zephyr said. "Yes." Caelum turned his face toward the main door. It was still locked. He listened past the alarm, past the mechanical pulsing and the red-tinged silence that alarms created, the way they made every other sound feel louder and more wrong. He pushed past all of it and listened to the hallway on the other side of the door. Footsteps. One set. Moving carefully. Not running. Not the heavy, purposeful stride of building security. Something slower. Measured. The walk of someone who was trying not to be heard but wasn't quite good enough at it. "There's someone in the hallway," Caelum said. The room stilled. One person. Moving from the east end. Slow pace, not security. "They're trying to be quiet." He paused. "They're not." The oldest one crossed the room in 4 steps. Stopped just short of the door. Listened. "I don't hear anything," the youngest said. "He does," the oldest said. Nobody argued with that. Caelum tracked the footsteps. They were getting closer. 30 feet, maybe. 25. The gait was slightly uneven, right foot landing harder than the left, like an old injury or a misstep earlier in the night. And there was something else. A sound underneath the footsteps. Faint. Almost nothing. A voice. Barely a whisper. But the hallway carried it. 2 words. Just 2. "Kill the witness." Caelum's chest went cold. He didn't say it immediately. He held it for 1 breath, 2. Long enough to be certain he'd heard what he'd heard and not what fear told him he'd heard. Because fear was a loud narrator. Fear rewrote things. He'd learned that. He'd learned to wait for the second listen before he trusted the first. The second listen confirmed it. Then he said quietly, "Someone just said kill the witness." In the hallway. 20 feet, maybe less. The youngest moved. The oldest was already at the secondary panel beside the door. His fingers moving across something Caelum couldn't see. The click and beep of an override code. The alarm cut to silence so sudden it felt physical, like pressure releasing from both ears at once. In the new quiet, the footsteps were unmistakable. 15 feet. 10. Zephyr said very low, "Caelum." Away from the door. Caelum moved left. Not because he was told to. Because it was the right tactical position and he'd already worked that out. He brought Juniper with him, pressed against the bookcase that lined the west wall, and he went completely still in the way that he had learned to go still. Not tense, not rigid, but absent. The kind of stillness that made rooms forget you were in them. He'd gotten very good at that kind of stillness. 11 years of practice. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Nothing for 4 seconds. 5. Then the sound of someone trying an access panel. A card swipe. Once. Twice. The door didn't open. The oldest one's voice came from somewhere near the center of the room. Not loud. "And we have you on camera. Every access point on this floor is sealed. You can walk away right now, or you can wait for building security to arrive in 4 minutes. Silence on the other side of the door. Then footsteps again. Moving away. Fast now. not the careful measured pace from before. Someone who had just recalculated and didn't like the math. Caelum exhaled slowly. Juniper pressed her nose against his jaw. The youngest one said, "He's running." "Let him," the oldest said. "We have what we need." A pause. "The camera," Caelum said. "Yes. You recorded him trying the door." Timestamp, access attempt, face capture from the corridor camera. The oldest's voice had settled back into that flat, even quality. Not calm exactly. More like a man who had just confirmed something he'd been expecting and was already 3 steps past the surprise of it. "Who was it?" Caelum said. "A beat. We'll confirm in the morning," Zephyr said. Not evasive. Careful. The difference was real. Caelum nodded. He moved away from the bookcase. Found the chair nearest to him, one of the large ones, leather, the kind that cost more than his monthly grocery bill, and sat down with Juniper still in his arms. His legs were steadier than he expected them to be. He was used to staying composed in uncomfortable moments. He'd had enough of them to build the skill. But this was a different category of uncomfortable than anything he'd navigated before, and he was aware of that distinction. Someone had been in that hallway with a specific intention. 2 words. Kill the witness. He was the witness. That was the first time it had truly landed in the body and not just the mind. He'd known it intellectually since Emery said his name and looked at him after the phone call. But knowing something in the mind and feeling it settle into your chest were 2 completely different experiences, and Caelum had never been someone who pretended otherwise. He sat with it, didn't perform calm, just found it the way he always did by going back to the things he could control. His breath, his posture, the weight of the dog in his arms, the feel of the chair beneath him. The youngest one, Caelum still didn't know his name, sat down across from him. Not at the desk, in the chair across from Caelum's, close enough to have a real conversation, like he'd made a deliberate choice about proximity. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I accused you of being a spy." Caelum waited. "I was wrong." It wasn't an elaborate apology. It wasn't performative. Just a statement of fact offered plainly, the way the oldest one delivered most things, and Caelum noted that. The youngest had absorbed something from the other 2. That directness. That willingness to say a thing without dressing it up first. "You didn't have enough information to know otherwise," Caelum said. "That doesn't make it right." "No," Caelum agreed. "But it makes it understandable." The youngest was quiet again. "Zevin," he said after a moment. "My name." Caelum nodded once. "Caelum. I know." A pause that wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people settling into the reality of knowing each other's names after a night that had skipped past the usual introductions entirely. Zephyr came back from the desk with something and set it on the arm of Caelum's chair. A small first aid kit from the sound and feel of it. Compact, hard-sided case. "For the dog," he said. Caelum opened it by feel. Ran his fingers across the contents. Found the gauze and the small wrap bandage and something that felt like an antiseptic pad, sealed in its individual packet the way hospitals pack them. "I need warm water," he said. Zephyr moved without being asked. The oldest one, and Caelum still hadn't gotten his name, had noticed that, had decided not to push. Pulled a chair over as well. Not close the way Zevin had positioned himself. Further back, but still inside the circle of the conversation. Not outside it observing. Inside it. That distinction mattered. Caelum worked on Juniper's paw. Slow. Careful. She flinched twice and made a low sound both times. And both times he paused and waited and spoke quietly until she settled, and then continued. Not because it was the only approach, because it was the right one. Pain responded to patience. He'd learned that early and he'd never unlearned it. Took about 8 minutes. When he was done, the gauze was wrapped neatly around the joint and Juniper had collapsed sideways onto his thigh with the particular exhausted surrender of a small animal that had decided it was done fighting for the night. Nobody had spoken during those 8 minutes. Caelum hadn't noticed until the silence registered as something deliberate. Something offered. 3 men who didn't have to be quiet had chosen to be, because he was doing something that required focus. And they had recognized that without being asked. He sat back. "She'll be okay," he said. "The joint isn't broken. She needs rest and a vet in the morning, but she'll be okay." The oldest one said, "Good, just that." But the word had weight to it that the single syllable didn't fully account for. Zephyr brought the water back. Then tea again without being asked. Caelum had stopped questioning the tea. It appeared when the room needed something to do and nobody wanted to say so out loud. There was something almost ritualistic about it. A way of saying we're still here without having to say it. He wrapped both hands around the mug. "Tell me about Demarian," he said. "Not demanding. Just asking. The way you asked about someone when the silence around their name had gotten too heavy to leave alone." Zevin shifted in his chair. Zephyr didn't move. The oldest one was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't reluctance. It was more like someone deciding where to start when the full story was too long and the night was already too heavy. Then, "He came to us 3 months ago. Brought documentation. Financial records showing systematic diversion of capital funds. Not a mistake. Pattern. Someone had been running a secondary structure inside the company's accounts for years, moving money in amounts small enough to avoid automated flags, but large enough to matter. Millions," Caelum said. "Across 6 years." "Yes. And Harrington. Harrington has been on the board for 9 years. He has final approval authority on 3 of the 5 account categories the money moved through." The oldest paused. "We couldn't move on him without more. He's protected. Board level, attorney level, politically connected. The kind of protected that makes investigations disappear if you move too early." So Demarian was gathering more. He had found something that connected Harrington directly to a third-party account. Not circumstantially. His signature. His personal access code. Filed in a data room that Harrington thought was sealed. Caelum was quiet. "Demarian didn't tell us where the files were stored," Zephyr said. "He was careful. He said he'd bring the location once he confirmed the backup." A pause. "He never made it back to us." The room held that. Caelum sat with the weight of it. He thought about a man he'd never met who'd carried documentation that could dismantle 9 years of quiet theft and had paid for it with everything. He thought about Juniper sleeping on his thigh, named in November, left in a stairwell by someone who wanted to send a message and didn't care what form the message took. That made something harden in him. Not anger exactly. Anger was loud. This was quieter. More durable. The kind of feeling that didn't burn fast and leave nothing. Settled in and stayed, and it asked something of you. "The files he found," Caelum said. "If they're still in that data room, they'll be gone by Friday," Zevin said. "That's what the board meeting is for. Then you have 2 days. Less," the oldest said. "Harrington knows someone heard that conversation, which means he knows his timeline is compromised. He'll move faster." Caelum turned this over. "The data room. What floor?" A pause. "36th," Zephyr said carefully. "Why?" Caelum thought back. The building. Tuesdays and Thursdays for 6 months. He'd memorized the layout not because he was thorough, but because memorizing layouts kept him from making mistakes. And mistakes in this job cost him contracts he couldn't afford to lose. The 36th floor. He'd never had a delivery there. But he'd passed through the 36th lobby twice on the way to the stairwell, taking the wrong set of stairs once on a night when the main elevator was under maintenance. The 36th had a different HVAC pattern from the floors above and below it. He'd noticed that and filed it without knowing why. The air moved differently, pushed through at a lower pressure. Like the floor was sealed tighter than the others. Like it was climate-controlled specifically, not generally. Data storage. That was why. Climate-controlled rooms for data storage had a specific environmental signature. He knew that now. "There's a secondary access point on the 36th floor," he said. "Service corridor. East side. The HVAC registers differently in that hallway. The air pressure is lower, the ventilation runs on its own circuit. I heard it twice. A room in that corridor is sealed separately from the rest of the floor." Nobody spoke. He felt the weight of their attention shift completely. That could be your data room, he said. Or something connected to it. The oldest one stood. Caelum heard it. The specific sound of someone who had been sitting with a problem and had just found the edge of a solution and couldn't stay still with it anymore. The creak of the chair releasing, the deliberate step forward. Zephyr, he said. Already pulling the floor plan, Zephyr said. Keyboard sounds. Quick. Precise. Zevon leaned forward in his chair. The lean was small but Caelum caught it. The way a body moved toward something when the mind had just locked onto it. Involuntary. Real. Secondary access with a separate climate circuit, Zevon said. That's not on the standard layout. It wouldn't be, Caelum said, if someone built it to stay off the standard layout. A beat. Off-book storage, the oldest said quietly. Inside the building's existing infrastructure. You'd need facilities access and enough authority to keep the maintenance logs clean. Harrington has facilities authority, Zephyr said. Not a question. Yes, the oldest confirmed. The room was moving now. Not physically, nobody was running anywhere. But the energy had shifted. Something that had been stuck for days had found a direction, and direction felt different from confusion the way wind felt different from still air. You couldn't see it, but everything it touched moved. Caelum sat with Juniper and the tea and let them work. He didn't insert himself. He listened because listening was what he did, and what he heard was three men moving through a problem together with the practiced ease of people who had been doing it for years. They finished each other's thoughts sometimes. Not often, they weren't the kind of men who performed closeness, but enough. They moved around each other's silences without irritation. They disagreed once, about the risk level of accessing the service corridor before confirming Harrington's timeline. And the disagreement was clean, direct, no performance in it. The youngest pushed back, the oldest listened fully before responding. Zephyr offered a third option that cut between both positions, and they landed there without anyone needing to win. That was unusual. Caelum had heard a lot of disagreements in a lot of rooms. Most of them were about ego as much as they were about the subject at hand. These three were genuinely trying to get to the best answer. Not the answer that made one of them right. The best one. He found himself thinking about that. What it took to build that. Not the capability, these were clearly capable men, but the willingness. The decision made somewhere along the way to care more about the outcome than the attribution. He sat with it and didn't say anything. Eventually the movement in the room slowed. Not resolved, but settled. Like pieces had been moved to better positions even if the game wasn't finished. The oldest one came and stood near the chair where Caelum sat. Not right beside it. A few feet away. He was quiet for a moment in the particular way he was quiet, that present thinking stillness that wasn't absence. It was its own kind of attention. You should sleep, he said. Caelum raised an eyebrow. Here. The building isn't safe for you to leave. Not tonight. He wasn't wrong about that. Caelum knew he wasn't wrong about that. The person in the hallway had walked away, yes. But walked away wasn't gone. Walked away was regrouping. He'd spent enough years navigating the world to know the difference between a threat that was over and a threat that had paused. This one had paused. There's a couch in the back room, Zevon said. Actual couch. Not a bad one. We've all used it, Zephyr added. The most words Caelum had heard him say in a row that weren't related to the investigation. It landed like something small and human, like a hand moving to fill a space that formality had left open. An admission that they were people who got tired. That this floor, for all its pressure and weight and expensive carpet, had also been a place where they lay down sometimes. Caelum sat with this. He thought about the bus home. The 43 steps from the stop to his building. The same dinner in his same kitchen. The controlled, quiet perimeter of a life he'd built specifically so that nothing unexpected could get in. Something unexpected had gotten in anyway. And the strange thing, the thing he wasn't ready to look at directly, was that the unexpected thing didn't feel like a mistake anymore. Felt like something had opened. He didn't say that. He said, "All right." And he followed the sound of Zevon's footsteps toward the back room with Juniper still tucked against his chest, and the rain still hitting the high windows, and the building quiet around them in a way that felt less like danger and more like a held breath between one moment and the next. He lay down on the couch. He didn't sleep immediately. He listened to the building. Somewhere on the 36th floor, in a service corridor with a separate climate circuit, there were files with a dead man's name connected to them. Files someone was going to move or destroy in less than 48 hours. And somewhere in this building, a man with a registered keycard and decades of protected authority had just sent someone to this floor. The intruder hadn't gotten through the door. But Caelum understood something about people who wanted to erase problems. They didn't stop. They just tried a different door. He lay in the dark and turned that over. He thought about Demarian, who had been careful, who had built a record that took months of quiet, dangerous work, who had named his dog in November and brought her to the office on days when the weight of what he was carrying probably made it hard to sit at a desk alone. He thought about what it cost to carry something like that for months without telling anyone the full picture. The discipline of it. The loneliness of it. He understood that kind of loneliness. Not the same version. But the shape was familiar. At some point he couldn't identify. Exhaustion pulled him under. He didn't dream. But when he surfaced briefly, just once, in the space between deep sleep and waking, he heard voices in the other room. Low. Familiar already, which surprised him. The oldest one was talking. Quietly. Not about the investigation. He was saying something about a repair. A chair leg from the sound of it. Asking Zephyr where the toolkit was. The kind of thing you only said out loud if you were comfortable. If the room felt like yours in a way that wasn't about ownership but about belonging. And then a pause. And then, he fixed the dog's paw the same way he does everything else. Like it was already obvious what needed to be done. Nobody responded to that. But Caelum heard it. He filed it. And he slept. He woke to the sound of something he hadn't expected. Not an alarm. Not a voice. A footstep. One. Outside the door of the back room. Not the familiar stride of any of the three men. Wrong weight. Wrong rhythm. Too deliberate. Wrong in the specific way that things were wrong when someone was trying to move through space they didn't fully know. His eyes opened in the dark and his body was already still. And from the other side of the door, very close now, came the sound of a handle being tested. Slowly. Deliberately. Someone who had found a different door. If this story is sitting with you right now, if Caelum's quiet fight to be seen feels like something you've lived, drop a comment below and tell us. What moment hit you hardest? Was it the wrong floor? The locked door? The way three powerful men went quiet so he could wrap a dog's paw in peace? Your comment might be exactly what someone else scrolling through needs to read tonight. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Every story on this channel is built to stay with you, and Chapter 4 is coming. Don't miss it. Chapter 4 being seen. The handle turned. Stopped. Turned again. Caelum didn't move from the couch. He kept his breathing even, not calm, controlled, the difference mattered, and tracked every sound that came through the door. The weight of the person outside. The slight adjustment of their stance as they realized the handle wasn't releasing. The shift from methodical to something closer to urgent, like a clock speeding up inside someone's chest. And then, from the main office, 5 seconds too late to be coincidental, a light came on. Voices. Movement. The sound of the oldest one crossing the room fast, and Zevin saying 2 words that Caelum didn't catch, and then the sharp electronic sound of an override panel being accessed. A door opened. Not the one Caelum was behind. The secondary one. The narrow one built into the west wall. A scuffle. Brief. The kind that ended quickly when one side had the advantage of expecting it and the other side had lost the element of surprise entirely. A grunt. A sharp sound of something striking the wall. Then controlled silence. The silence of a situation that had been resolved, not abandoned. Caelum stood. He crossed the back room, found the door handle, opened it. The main office was brighter than he expected. He could tell from the way the air moved, the way the space opened up differently under more light, the warmth of it against his face. Everything felt more defined, more certain. Zevin said, "Stay where you are." He wasn't talking to Caelum. Caelum moved to the center of the room and stopped. There was a fourth person in the space now. He could feel it, the disruption in the room's established weight. A smaller presence than the three alphas, tighter, the kind of tension that came off someone who had been caught mid-action and was still running calculations on whether there was a way out. There wasn't. He could feel that too, the way exits close when the people holding them know exactly what they're doing. Theodis Crane, the oldest said. Not a question. A name offered like evidence. Like something already proven. The fourth person didn't respond immediately. Then, roughly, I don't know what you think you have. I think we have you on this floor at 1:43 in the morning. The oldest's voice had gone to that flat, certain place. The place with no edges because it didn't need them. I think we have a keycard record, a camera record, a corridor access log, and a witness testimony placing you in a stairwell at 11:20 tonight where a specific conversation was overheard. He paused, measured. And I think we have a recording of you outside this office 2 hours ago. Silence. That silence was different from all the other silences in the night. It was the silence of a man whose options had just been presented to him one by one, each one removed, until what remained was not a choice but a condition. Harrington sent you, Zevin said. Not heated. Just matter of fact, the way you stated things when you were done pretending they were in question. When the question had already been answered and everyone in the room knew it. Theodis Crane said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Caelum stood at the center of the room and listened to the breathing of a man whose calculations had run out. He'd heard that sound before, not often, but enough. The specific rhythm of someone at the end of a road they'd chosen and could no longer pretend was taking them somewhere good. There's a secondary data room on the 36th floor, the oldest said. Service corridor, east side. Harrington had it built 5 years ago to house documents he needed to keep accessible but off the formal record. He let that land. We know about it now. We're accessing it in the morning with legal oversight present. Caelum heard the shift in Crane's breathing. A small, sharp exhale. Like something had just punctured. Like the last calculation had finally come up wrong and the body acknowledged it before the mind was ready to. The files Demarian found, the oldest continued. They're still there. Harrington didn't move them yet. He thought he had until Friday. Another pause. Deliberate. He doesn't. Caelum thought about Demarian. He thought about a man who had carried something difficult for months, alone because he believed it mattered, and had paid the highest possible price for believing that. He thought about what it meant that his work was still intact. That the thing he'd built carefully at cost had survived him. That it was still going to do what he'd built it to do. That mattered. He stood in the center of the room and let that thought have its full weight. Then he let it settle into something purposeful. Take him to the security office, Zephyr said. Practical. Clean. Not theatrical, not emotional. Just the next step stated plainly. Movement. The sound of Zevin crossing the room. The sound of Crane being guided, not roughly but firmly, the way you guided someone when the time for conversation was over, toward the main door. The lock releasing. And then they were gone. The room was 3 people again. Caelum, the oldest. Zephyr, somewhere by the desk, already returning to something. Juniper woke up at some point during all of it and had made her way. Slowly, favoring the wrapped paw. To the center of the room, the way she always seemed to find the center of things. She pressed her side against Caelum's leg. He reached down and found her ear. The oldest one said, "You heard him coming." Yes. Before any of the alarms. The alarms weren't going to help. He came through a different access point this time. Internal one. Not the corridor. Caelum paused. If I hadn't heard the handle, we would have been slower, the oldest said simply. Caelum didn't argue. The oldest moved to the desk. Sat down. For the first time all night, he sounded like a man who had been awake for too long. Not weak, nothing like weak, just present in a different way. Like the layer that kept everything contained had thinned slightly, the way walls thinned at a certain hour. He was still himself. Just more of it. There's something I should tell you, he said. Caelum waited. We didn't let you stay here only because of the safety risk. Caelum was quiet. When you walked into this office tonight, We'd been in this building for 11 hours. We'd been on this floor since 2 in the afternoon. He paused. Every person who came through that door between then and midnight was performing. Performing, Caelum repeated. They defer. They adjust their posture. They watch us to see what reaction they should give before they give it. The oldest's voice was careful now, not in a guarded way, but in the way of someone being precise about something they hadn't said out loud before. It gets exhausting in a way that's hard to explain. Not because we need people to be casual with us, but because performing is hollow. You spend enough time in rooms full of hollow things and you start to feel it in your own chest. Caelum didn't say anything. You knelt on the floor and wrapped a dog in your scarf, the oldest continued. And you talked to it the same way you would have talked to it if we weren't there. You didn't adjust. You didn't check our faces. The way a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. Not the sound of it, not the drama of it, just the slow, real arrival of something different in the air. He didn't say anything for a moment. He sat with the weight of being seen by 3 men who, by any reasonable measure, had no reason to see him at all. Then, most people try to manage what they're afraid of. And you? I used to, Caelum said. I got tired of it. The oldest one was quiet, not the evaluating quiet. The kind that came after something real had been said and the person on the other side of it was deciding what it meant for them. Zephyr, from the desk, said quietly, "His name is Emery." A pause. "Mine is Zephyr." He said it without looking up. "You already had that one." "I did," Caelum said. "And Zevin," from the direction of the door. Zevin had come back, alone, quiet, the sound of his footsteps recognizable now to Caelum in the way that voices became recognizable when you'd been in the same room with someone through something real. Individual, distinct, already filed. Caelum held the 3 names. Emery, Zephyr, Zevin. Outside, the rain had slowed. Not stopped, just pulled back to something quieter. The kind of rain that settled in for the long stay instead of announcing itself. Patient. Zevin came back into the room fully and dropped into the chair he'd claimed earlier. His spot, apparently, the one he returned to. Caelum had noticed that people revealed things in their habitual positioning. Where someone chose to put themselves in a room without thinking about it told you what they were oriented toward. Zevin was always oriented toward the conversation. "What happens in the morning?" Caelum said. "Legal team arrives at 7, Emery said. "We access the 36th floor with oversight. Document everything. Chain of custody from the first file. And Harrington. He'll know we have it within an hour of us accessing the room. His attorney will start filing by 9. Emery's voice was flat, certain. "But the evidence will already be in legal custody. The access logs, the keycard records, the camera footage from tonight, the financial documents Demarian collected. All of it in a chain that can't be quietly broken." Caelum was quiet for a moment, turning it over. "Public trial," Zevin said. The tone of it was flat too, not eager, just where the logic seemed to point. "No," Emery said. A pause. "A board member going to trial is a media event," Emery said. "It protects no one and distracts from the actual damage. 6 years of misallocated funds that affected 3 pension accounts, 2 charitable endowments, and a workforce development initiative that got defunded 3 years ago." He paused. "We want the money recovered. We want the structure dismantled. We want him removed in a way that has no recovery option and no public platform." "Quiet," Caelum said. "Yes. No press. No statement. Just a resignation and a financial settlement that goes where it was supposed to go. And a criminal referral filed privately with a federal compliance body, where it will sit on permanent record." Emery said it the way you'd say something had been decided already. Because it had. "He'll spend the rest of his professional life unable to serve on any public or private board in this country. He'll know exactly why. And the people whose money he moved will get it back." Caelum was quiet for a moment. "That's a harder outcome to arrange than a public case," he said. "Yes. More moves. More precision. Harder to hold together." "Yes. But it actually fixes something. Emery didn't respond to that. He didn't need to. Caelum sat back in the chair. Juniper had made her way up beside him at some point. She just appeared, the way she always did, like she'd decided where she was needed and went there without being invited. Her wrapped paw was extended on the cushion. Her breathing was easy. The room was warm. The rain was soft. Somewhere outside, the city was doing whatever cities did at 2 in the morning, existing in the particular quiet that belonged only to that hour. The hour between the people who stayed up and the people who rose early. The hour that felt like it didn't belong to anyone except the people who had no choice but to be in it. Zevin said, "What are you going to do?" Caelum turned toward him. "About what? After this?" Caelum thought about it honestly. Not the polished version. The real one. Go home. Count the bus chimes. Make the same dinner. Deliver the same envelopes to the same floors. Reestablish the routine he had built not because it was satisfying but because it was safe, and safe was what he had learned to want when wanting more felt like a risk he couldn't afford. "I'll go back to work," he said. "The courier route." "Yes." A pause. Then Zevin said carefully, and Caelum caught the careful, heard the intention in it. "We need a sound analyst." Caelum waited. Not permanently. For the documentation phase. The recordings from tonight need to be reviewed by someone who can identify specific voices, ambient environmental markers, timestamp patterns. He paused. The legal team has technical staff. None of them heard what you heard tonight. None of them caught the keycard pattern. None of them clocked the footstep gate or the HVAC variance on 36. He paused again. You did all of that without trying. That's a different kind of job, Caelum said. It's a temporary contract, Zephyr said, from the desk. Paid at consulting rate. 3 weeks, maybe 4. Caelum didn't respond immediately. He was aware, in the way he was always aware of pressure in a room, that this offer was not just practical. It was real. The investigation genuinely needed what he could do. He understood that, he was certain of it. But there was something underneath it that he recognized and didn't name out loud. An invitation. Not to stay because they needed him, though they did, but to stay because the room had made space for him and wasn't in a hurry to take it back. I'll think about it, he said, which was not no. Emery said nothing, but the quality of his silence changed, settled, like something that had been suspended had found a place to rest. 3 weeks passed. Not quickly, not smoothly. There were complications, there always were, in things this carefully constructed. The 36th floor data room access went exactly as planned, and the documentation took 4 days instead of 2, because the files were more extensive than anyone had anticipated. Demarian had been thorough, extraordinarily thorough. He had built a record that was nearly airtight, cross-referenced and cataloged with the methodical precision of someone who understood that, if he got this wrong, there was no second attempt. They found a note in the files, dated 2 weeks before he disappeared. 3 lines. Caelum didn't see it. Zevin read it to him one afternoon, quietly, when the two of them were alone in the office and the work had paused for a moment and the building outside was doing its midday thing. Full, loud, oblivious to everything happening on this floor. The note said, "If something happens to me, this is what I found. I'm not doing this for recognition. I'm doing it because the people whose money went missing have names and the names deserve better than silence." Zevin read it once, and then he was quiet for a long time, not performing grief, just sitting inside it, letting it be what it was. Caelum didn't try to fill the silence. He just let Zevin have it, because some moments didn't need words. They needed someone willing to be present inside them without trying to make them smaller or more manageable or more comfortable. And Caelum had learned, was still learning, that presence was its own form of care. Not the loudest kind, but the most durable. After a while, Zevin said, "He was good at his job." "Yes," Caelum said. "He deserved better." "He did." A long pause. "The money's going back," Zevin said. "Not as comfort, as fact. As the thing that was true and needed to be said plainly. The program he cared about, the workforce development one, it's being reinstated. Full funding." His name is going on the documentation that made it happen. Caelum nodded once. That felt right. It didn't fix what was unfixable. Nothing would. But it was real. It was something that existed in the world because of what Demarian had done, and it would exist long after the investigation was closed and the files were sealed and Harrington's resignation letter was forgotten by everyone except the people it directly affected. That was how quiet justice worked. Not with noise, with permanence. Harrington resigned on a Thursday morning. No press release. No statement to the media. No carefully worded acknowledgement of what had led here. The internal memo went to board members only, citing personal reasons and a transition of authority. By Friday afternoon, the financial recovery process had been initiated through a private legal mechanism that would take 18 months to complete, but would return every misappropriated dollar to the accounts it came from. 3 pension funds, 2 endowments, a workforce development program that had been quietly shuttered 3 years ago and could now, slowly, be rebuilt. No headlines. No courtroom cameras. No spectacle. Just a transfer of documents and the quiet, permanent closing of a door. Caelum was in the office when the memo went out. He was reviewing the final audio documentation files, his portion of the work, the piece that only he could have done. Timestamps confirmed. Voice patterns identified and cross-referenced. Ambient markers cataloged and matched to physical locations within the building. A record that would stand up under legal scrutiny because it was built on precision, not assumption. Because it had been built by someone who paid attention to what rooms said when people stopped listening. Emery set something on the desk beside him. Not tea this time. Folder. What is it? Caelum said. A formal letter of acknowledgement from the legal oversight body. It names the evidence contributors. A pause. Your name is on it. Caelum didn't move for a moment. He sat with that. The specific feeling of having your name attached to something real. Something that existed in the world and pointed back to something you had actually done. Not performed. Not managed your way through. Actually done. Demarian's name is on it too, Emery said. First. Caelum exhaled. Slowly. Good, he said. Just good. He meant it as a whole sentence. Complete. No additions. Zevon came in around noon with food. Actual food, not vending machine food, the kind that came in containers from a place that required a reservation and had opinions about ingredients, and set it up on the desk without ceremony. Zephyr moved his laptop to the side without being asked. Emery pulled a chair over. They ate. Nobody announced it. Nobody made a thing of it. It just happened the way things happened between people who had stopped needing to narrate their own actions to each other. Caelum didn't leave. Not right after the food. Not when the afternoon light came through the windows. He could feel it, the shift in warmth on his hands, the way the room's temperature changed when the sun moved. Not when the building started to thin out around them as evening moved in and the floors below went quiet one by one. The way buildings quieted when the day people went home and the night settled in. At some point the rain came back. Soft. The same rain that had been there at the beginning. It had a different quality now. Not threatening. Not heavy with what was coming. Just rain. Doing what rain did. Caelum was sitting in the same chair he'd occupied most of the week. The large one, leather, near the window. Juniper was on his feet, which she had decided was her preferred location and had defended against all alternatives. Her wrapped paw had healed well. The vet had confirmed it 4 days in, and she moved now with the confidence of a small animal that had survived something and knew it. Emery came and stood near the window. Not the desk. The window, close to where Caelum was sitting. He was quiet for a moment. Not the investigating quiet or the deciding quiet. Something more open than both of those. Why do you always try to disappear? He said. The question was quiet. Not accusatory. Not clinical. Just genuinely asking. The way you ask something when you already cared about the answer. Caelum was quiet for a moment. Because disappearing is safe, he said. He'd said it without thinking. But it landed as the truest version of itself. Not complicated, not defended, not dressed up with context and explanation. Just accurate. Emery was quiet. Then, you've been doing it your whole life. Probably. And has it worked? Caelum thought about that honestly. He thought about 43 steps from the bus stop. The same dinner. The delivery routes memorized down to the mechanical lag in each elevator. The controlled, deliberate smallness of a life built to prevent anything unexpected from reaching him. He thought about a wrong floor, a locked door, a dog named Juniper in November. 3 men whose names he now knew and whose presences he could identify from the sound of their footsteps in a hallway. No, he said. The word came out easy, like it had been waiting near the surface for a while and had finally found the right question to pull it up. Emery moved closer, not invasively, not performing intimacy, just inside the real range of a real conversation, the range people occupied when they weren't managing distance anymore, when they'd stopped calculating how much space to maintain. You don't have to disappear here, he said. Caelum held that. He turned it over slowly. He'd been given things before. Offerings dressed up as care, accommodations framed as acceptance, attention that was really just another version of being observed. He knew what all of those felt like. They had a particular texture, something hollow in the center of them, like they'd been built for the giver more than the receiver. This didn't have that texture. This felt like a man who had watched someone arrive unexpectedly and had made room, quietly, without announcement, and was now simply letting him know the room was still there. Caelum didn't say yes. He didn't need to. He just stayed. The rain hit the glass in the particular way it always did on this floor. A little louder than the floors below, the windows taller, the sound more full. Zevon was somewhere across the room, talking quietly to Zephyr about something that wasn't the investigation. Normal things. The sound of people who had stopped performing for the night and were just being themselves in a shared space. Juniper shifted on his feet. Someone, Zephyr, from the direction, set a mug of tea on the arm of his chair without comment. No production. No waiting for acknowledgement. Just the mug, and then the quiet return to whatever he'd been doing. And then, after a moment, Caelum felt the weight of something settle over his shoulders. A blanket. He hadn't asked for it. He reached up and pulled it closer. The room smelled like tea and rain and cedar and the particular warmth of a space that had been occupied by people who had stopped pretending they didn't need each other. Caelum Virel sat in the office where he had once stood in a doorway holding someone else's sealed envelope, certain he'd made the worst mistake of his life. He sat with his hands wrapped around warm tea, a dog snoring on his feet. 3 men moving around him like he'd always been there. He had spent 11 years learning to navigate a world that treated his presence as a complication. 11 years disappearing before anyone could ask him to. 11 years building walls that were so well constructed even he had started to believe they were just who he was. And tonight, in the office he had stumbled into by accident on the wrong floor in the rain on a Tuesday, he understood something he hadn't expected to understand. He hadn't walked into the wrong office. He had walked into the place where someone finally saw him, not despite what he was, because of it, every single part of it. The rain kept falling. The city kept moving 47 floors below. And for the first time in a very long time, Caelum didn't count the exits. He just sat and let the room hold him. If something in Caelum's story stayed with you, if you know what it feels like to build your life small just to keep it safe, or if you've ever walked into the wrong place and found exactly what you needed, drop a comment below. Tell us what moment hit you. Your words in that comment section are not just for us. They're for the next person who scrolls through and needs to know they're not alone in it. If this is your first story here, subscribe right now and turn on your notifications. Because every story on this channel is built to move you, to sit with you, and to remind you that being seen is never the wrong destination. Share this with someone today, someone who's been disappearing, someone who needs to hear that the wrong floor might be exactly right. We'll see you in the next story.